play all 4 story routes in one save, a time skip has been confirmed-ish, Seteth is here, Sothis feet, and they fixed the rewind mechanic. That enough of an attention grabber for you? Good, because that's just the tip of what we learned today about Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
The darkest dark.
Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of all things turn-based tactics and strategy, especially my favorite franchise of all time, Fire Emblem, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. The Nintendo Direct for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave has arrived, and intro jokes aside, there seriously is a ton to discuss here. I've broken things into 3 sections for the video that are timestamped in the description and the play bar, so feel free to jump around as you desire. We're just going to get kicked right off with the story, shall we? There's too much to discuss for any more preamble. So while we already knew the general background of our heroes, we've learned a bit more about each of their motivations and overall background story. We actually meet Kai's father, Castor, before he's taken to prison. We learn that Dietrich very specifically was shipwrecked by a giant sea beast and wants only to kill strong opponents, whether it be man or beast. And he may also absorb their life essence, which could be part of what drives him to kill in the first place. He's getting a little bit more crazed and bloodthirsty looking every time we see him, so we'll have to see how that one shakes out. Theodora's people worship the goddess of death and night, and Theodora herself seeks to restore this disgraced goddess to glory. She also lost her arm in the same assassination attempt that took her father's life, so she wears a prosthetic now, Melania style, which is probably where part of her strength comes from. It might even be some sort of like a hero's relic equivalent type deal. It definitely doesn't seem normal, especially because, you know, like we're in a setting of magic. It's got to be magical in some way for it to be a functional prosthetic in that way. Finally, we see more directly the death of Letta's father, with a large number of individuals she has vowed to kill in connection with his demise. Seeing as how the man who killed him is a competitor in the games currently, we should be getting some juicy drama there. With that said though, the bulk of the news story details entail Sothis and our avatar character, Eshmel. We knew very little about them before, but now we know, based on this new trailer and information from the Japanese official website, that the game actually begins 5 years after the events of the heroic games. We technically start with the time skip, but there's a caveat there that we're going to get into. This time skip occurs due to the apocalyptic rebirth of the demon god Balor, which has ruined Dagda, that is actively still under siege, and even the 4 heroes of the games are missing, presumed dead. Theodora's statue we can see here is defaced, a potential hint that this god is connected to the faith of her people in some fashion. And in fact, I actually have a theory that this draconic-looking woman who seems to open the portal may in fact be the goddess of death and night herself that the people of Saramis worship. Although, if this is actually that god named Euphas or Eupas, we'll have to wait and see. That said though, in response to the devastation, Sothis summons Eshmel, who is potentially known as the Lord of Flame if these screens are anything to go by, and almost certainly is going to be this game's version of the Fire Emblem, to serve alongside the goddess of fate, Fortuna, who we have our first reveal of here, allowing them to return to the past and save the lords and their retinues, to then return to the future and help push back the demons and the undead. This is where we're going to get our route choice between the 4 lords at the start of the game. But even then, there's a twist if you're someone who's familiar with something like 3 Houses and are expecting things to work quite the same as they did before. No longer true. You see, we're going to be able to hop between each of the lords' stories at will by talking to this bird, who's definitely not Eshmel watching over their charges. Don't mind the fact that they turn into the bird in the middle of their little fight scene at the end of the trailer here. It's definitely a different creature, right? For sure. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This allows you to play all 4 routes in one run of the game, and each lord's story is saved separately so you can hop between them whenever you want and not ruin what you're working on for one of the other characters. We'll also apparently be able to choose to fight alone in the future, or save some/all of the lords, making for a pretty customizable experience based on just how much there is to actually do in the post-time skips period, which is something that we've not really seen anything about, but it is interesting that they call it out as an option. Regardless though, this does mean that we do have a proper 3 Houses style time skip at some point, even if, you know, we're starting in the skip and then jumping back to the past and then going back to the future once again, hop in the DeLorean, we gotta go. Like, how exactly this is gonna work, it's not entirely clear, but it seems like we definitely start there and then go back. As far as less direct story beats are concerned, more like world building and character stuff, there's actually also some other good nuggets to discuss here. First of all, yes, as mentioned, Seteth himself from 3 Houses is in the game. 100% confirmed. He's right here. He even has the same attacks on his Wyvern. It sounds like it's the same VA, and he has the same combat victory line. The only major difference here is he either dyed his hair or it's like changing color with age or something. And as we can see, his eyebrows and the tips of his braid are still green. There's really no more confirmation that you need that this is actually Seth from Fodlan. And I think it is another confirmation that we are in the future of Three Houses, that this is a sequel of some kind. It makes me very happy because I'm a longtime fan of Seth, as I know many of you probably are as well. It does, however, raise the question of where the heck is Flayn, because unless she decided to finally strike out on her own and Seth's here on like a sad boy trip around the world or something, he really wouldn't be likely to be separated from her. But I have a theory about that as well. I think we may have already seen Flayn here in Nimue. She's got the same type of green hair that you would expect, and notably we're not able to see her ears, something that has been a recurring thing with her in the past. It's just a hunch. It may or may not pay off. I've seen some people say that there's no way it's her because she speaks too differently, she dresses too differently. Maybe she's just a depressed emo dragon girl who's grown up and gone into her goth phase, you know? It's possible. You never know. And she does warn people to stay away from her for some reason or another. Maybe she's hiding undercover from her dad. Maybe there's some other reason that they're here and they're being hunted again or something. Who knows? We'll have to see. But I do think it's a little bit too much of a coincidence that we have another green-haired character here that thus far has no other major connections to any other characters. Makes you wonder. Regardless though, we've also met a bunch of other characters, including some of the actual gods who, as has been discussed in the past in other trailers, are very much alive and active still in Dagda. Now we've seen not only Fortuna, who obviously has a major role in the story, but also Mars, Aurora, and Smirnos. I keep wanting to say Smirnoff on that one. What can I say? It just sounds too similar. My apologies. But considering that we've been told that there are 7 temples, I imagine we could also potentially see a temple to Sothis. Or we could see lesser gods of different domains in the same way that Fortuna is the goddess of fate, and Aurora seems to be the goddess of light and hope and all that fun stuff. Regardless of how it's going to work, I'm very eager to find out because there's another notable aspect of their characters here, which is that each one has a crest associated with them, as you would probably expect. Aurora has the crest of Albin here as an example. When we use the god's blessings after being granted them, the crest symbol actually appears, and what this means for blessed characters story-wise, how it connects to crests in the context of Fodlan and Three Houses, I honestly have no idea at this point, and I don't think anybody else does either. But since we have seen many characters in Fortune's Weave do have crests associated with them separately from this system of blessings, it's really going to be very interesting to see what we can learn about this whole thing, and again, what that means for the fate of Fodlan if this is the sequel that it's looking more and more like it is going to be. Now that's the story stuff, but I briefly want to touch on the visuals, just a sort of impressions thing before we move on to the biggest section of the video, the mechanics. Because I have to say, I'm very impressed with all the visuals and the artistic choices that we've seen for Fortune's Weave thus far. One of the biggest critiques of Three Houses was how poorly many of the textures were handled due to the limitations of the Switch and probably just lack of experience working with the hardware with the studios, all that fun stuff, as well as things like the color palette being very drab, very muted in a lot of places. On the flip side, Engage had very controversial designs, to put it very mildly, and had an extremely bright, sometimes painfully so, color scheme to seemingly flip to the other side of the spectrum compared to Three Houses. But now, as we've seen with more of the character designs, more combat animations, more cutscenes, and more of the world in general, Fortune's Weave looks like it has solved 99% of those issues, while also evolving aspects of weapons and classes and their designs to suit the region of Dagda and the culture that it has. The cutscenes, again, that we have seen have been absolutely beautiful. Various different fight scenes, characters talking with each other, backstory sections, they all look phenomenal. I don't know who did these, but Nintendo needs to keep them around for the entire future of Fire Emblem. Thank you very much. There's been very little in the way of any of the designs for characters or classes that I've found particularly egregious. Again, maybe that's coming off the back of Engage, but these characters look really, really good, dude. Especially with the wide variety of them. Like, you compare Dietrich, who looks extreme even for Fodlan, to like Kai or Letta or Theodora, just as the lords, and they all look very distinct and like they come from different parts of the land, which is awesome. Even just the world itself has very little in the way of rough, shoddy textures or low frame rate issues. I mean, running around Dagazin itself, the dungeons, the world map, it all looks really nice. Really, the only issue that I've personally had thus far is a rather low frame rate, shall we say, on some of the attendees we saw in the arena in this most recent trailer. But I can forgive that if it's one of the only issues that we see visually. Again, only time will tell once we get our hands on it, but even the color palette is a nice balance between what we've seen with Three Houses and Engage. It's nowhere near as muted as Three Houses, with a much stronger display of tans and yellows, browns, and deeper versions of more typically bright colors, but it still avoids going super oversaturated in the way that Engage was. It's a very comfortable balance that they've struck here. I feel like it really suits the region of Dagda as a more desert, sunny country, while still giving them a good range and variety to work with. Like, again, we got Brazilian Miku over here, who's about as bright as it can get, but compared to a lot of the other characters, she stands out in a way that I think is very intentional. It's not just the design of the game, it's the design of her, and that type of thing I absolutely enjoy and appreciate. Now, though, we need to talk about the mechanics we've seen thus far, and there is a lot, both brand new information and very important elaboration on things we've seen or understood previously, as well as things we've just assumed because, it's a Fire Emblem game. I'm not going to go in any particular order with these, instead just kind of hitting them as they come to me and discussing them as we go. So, first of all, and this is a big one, credit to Serenus Force for pointing this one out on Twitter, in-game growths. It is finally a thing. We are assuming that these growths that you're able to see here on Theodora's stat sheet are combining her base growths, like as a unit, and her class growths, because otherwise some of these would be absolutely insane. It looks like she's probably in the Armor Knight class since she has 4 movement here, and we can see exactly what her likelihood is to increase each individual stat as she levels up. No more data mining required, no more tools to calculate different things, unless you want to do like some pre-planning or whatever, in which case, by all means, fair enough. But now you can see this very vital information right here on a main status screen. Absolutely peak stuff. I love to see it because people just data mine all this stuff anyway, so it may as well just be there for everyone to see from the jump. As far as weapon durability is concerned, I've seen a lot of waffling and discussion about this one, but now it seems like the way it works is that all weapons have relatively low durability because it only gets consumed when you use combat arts. You're not going to use up your durability with your basic attacks now, which is good, seeing as how there's so many skirmishes and random fights and story battles and yada yada yada. You only have to worry about your weapons getting worn down when you use them for combat arts, which I think is a pretty decent balance. You're not using HP to use combat arts. You don't need your weapons to have massively overinflated durability so you can spam combat arts. It keeps it low. It keeps it as a valuable resource. It makes higher tier weapons that have higher durability all the more valuable, while still allowing you to have weapon durability in the game, since it's something that a lot of people have kind of grown away from, even though, as a purist, I still really like to see it. It's a very nice balancing option, and I think it's going to be a good lever for them to pull in the future to keep making things better and more improved. Now, if you're looking for combat arts that still drain your HP, you're going to be looking for the Blaze arts. We have seen these before. They're locked to the 4 lords, it seems, and they do drain your health to use very powerful abilities. I put them here because it's specifically mentioned that they drain your soul to use, which obviously is what affects your HP, but I found it interesting that we do have that distinction now between your standard combat arts and your Blaze arts and the different resources that they utilize. Next up, and this is a really big one, I'm very excited about this game's iteration of the Divine Pulse mechanic that allows you to rewind time after any move if you get bad RNG or a character gets killed or something you forgot to do or you misread an enemy's attack range or whatever, that has been a big balancing problem for Fire Emblem since they first introduced it with Shadows of Valencia, has now been rebalanced in a way. It now uses a resource called Divine Sand rather than specific pulse charges or whatever, but it shares this resource with the powerful buffs that are granted by the gods, which you acquire when you go and service their temples. So now, you actually have to decide if you're going to need to rewind time more or apply boons to more likely guarantee your success using these buffs and blessings of the gods. This could be an excellent way to balance out a mechanic that has been very valuable for the much more casual fan, or just in circumstances where maybe a map isn't super well designed, or you just get horribly bad RNG and don't want to have to reset the whole thing. Sometimes it's useful for that, but it's always been a contentious mechanic. It's caused quite the divide in the different sides of the player base, newer and older. This could be a good way to have it be a mechanic that actually feels like another resource that you have to balance, something that makes more sense in the terms of the game because it's another godly power alongside these other blessings. And if it's handled right, and you don't get an overabundance of divine sand, or the rewind mechanic is not ridiculously cheap for no reason, it could mean that you actually have very few uses of it that you need to choose when to utilize very intelligently. I love this as a concept. I'm very eager to see more. I can only hope that this fixes one of the long-standing issues with modern Fire Emblem that I and many others have had. Speaking of long-standing issues, we once again do not have the weapon triangle from everything that we've been able to see. Maybe we'll have like breaker skills come in again or something like that. I'm still disappointed by this. I see no reason that the weapon triangle shouldn't exist. It's a staple of the franchise, but there you go. We don't have it. C'est la vie, so it goes. However, certain weapons do apparently have more built-in traits now, such as arrows still being good against flyers. We now have lances now being effective supposedly at all times against all cavalry, and gauntlets now apparently boost evade rates, which could make your fisticuff fighters, your monks and the like, a lot more viable if they get to be really strong dodge tanks. I love this. I do really enjoy when weapons are more fleshed out in what they're able to do based on what category they are in tactics games. I think this could be a very good change, again, depending on how it's handled. Promotion is confirmed to work near identically to Three Houses, which is something that we had been assuming. You need a certain level and then a certain rank with different skills to increase your chances of successfully promoting. Eventually, you'll be guaranteed to be able to promote, and you have 3 different tiers of promotion: beginner, specialty, and advanced. There are 5 beginner classes that hit the general tropes that you would expect. Gladiators are just your weapon specialists, diviners are your mages, Orneus riders are your starting cavalry, that type of thing. And there's 10 specialty classes where you start to get into more, obviously, specialized roles, like your archers and your rogues and all that type of good stuff. And then an unknown number of advanced classes that specifically are said to combine a lot of the different aspects of different types of units, such as heavy cavalry, that has all the bonuses of being cavalry while also being heavily armored like knights. Kind of like, think like a great knight if you're familiar with them from games like Fire Emblem and the Sacred Stones. As far as some new classes that we've seen alongside our returning favorites, we have the Guardian, which is an infantry-based class mixing both lances and light magic, Elephant Riders, which take up 4 spaces and can plow through targets for big damage, and Charioteers that are smaller and more nimble than the Elephant Riders, but which have a similar operation where they're able to trample enemies in a straight line. Moving over to discuss the world map a little bit here, we've seen that some of our concerns about time have been allayed a little bit, as we now know that traveling on the world map costs a certain amount of hours per space moved or activity engaged in, not full days for each, so you're not going to burn all of your time just trying to move around the map. That said, there are a lot of things to do on the map, including the fully explorable dungeons that we've seen before, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a second, as well as towns with specific times that their shops are open, godly shrines to find for new boons, roving bands of enemies to fight, animals to rescue and learn skills from, and the list goes on. Returning to the dungeons, though, we've seen these are very Shadows of Valencia style dungeons where you're able to run around in a third-person camera, destroy rocks and minerals and boxes to get resources, find treasures, and also, of course, run into enemies. You actually battle these enemies in a more traditional JRPG style, with your crew lining up and fighting directly with basic attacks, skills, magic, etc. This seems like it's going to be a much snappier way of actually approaching these smaller fights in these dungeons, and you can even auto-battle or skip them if you so choose. But I enjoy the fact that the parties seem to have shared pools of HP. So you're not like going through and individually controlling each character's like health and mana and everything. You have a collective pool, and then you just choose what your characters are going to do with their turn during the battle. So it should still keep things fairly streamlined while giving you a very different perspective to approach and use your characters from, which is super cool. I'm very curious to see how classes might have an impact on this, if they do at all. Maybe they won't, who knows. When you are adventuring the world map, the 4 different heroes each have a different ability that they can utilize. Dietrich uses his sword to reveal hidden enemies. Theodora is able to recruit troops from various different towns and then either send them out to gather resources or use them as another tactical option in combat, something we've seen before, using the Gambit system from Three Houses, which is very cool to see return. Kai is able to tame and recruit animals, or at the very least we think it's just Kai that can do this, that he's then able to gather extra abilities and skills from. Seems like you might be able to build out a little bit of a create your own character with him through this system, which is nice. And then Letta can put on performances at towns to gain a ton of money, resources, and the like. Very cool stuff, and I like that it leans into what each character actually tends to do. Very nice way of fleshing them out a little bit more. Of course, the world map is not the only thing that you will be exploring, as we have a new version of the monastery, and it is Dagsian. However, for those of you who have PTSD from dealing with Garrigbach Monastery, it does seem like Dagsian's been pretty well streamlined. You have the normal range of activities to take on that you would probably probably expect basic chores to gain XP and skill levels, training in the arena, cooking to boost support between your characters, other characters you can find to work on recruiting, forging weapon upgrades, etc., etc. However, there were a few other options that really stood out to me that I think are worth commenting a little bit more on. First of all, you can watch other teams fight in the arena to learn not only how they tend to play for when you do fight them for real, but also to build your own skill set, which is very cool. You're able to send characters on extended gathering and training missions if you want to burn a ton of time at once. We're talking being able to send someone out on one particular task for 30 days of your allotment before your next match, if not more, so you can really burn through time if you want to just do a focused set of training and not have to go through all of the rigmarole of every day being a new thing. It's very streamlined in that regard, and you have the ability to rest at inns to recover your HP, your MP, and your motivation to do other tasks. That last one is huge, as it means you're going to have to budget in time and money to actually get recovery in between other battles. You're not going to automatically heal, or at the very least not automatically full heal after every fight and encounter that you do. So if you're going to want to be able to stay on top of your game and approach each match or other skirmish match with all of your options available to you, you're going to need to make sure you keep that money and that time aside to get healed up when it counts, which I love. You need to be smart and tactical about how you approach even just your training, and that's a good way to keep the whole monastery-esque system interesting and engaging. For the last couple of things here, first of all, we have learned, of course, multiple difficulties are confirmed. The Japanese website states that we have normal and hard, as well as the option to toggle on casual or classic to activate or turn off permadeath. All the basics are back. I'm sure there's probably going to be like a lunatic or a maddening mode or something that comes along as well. We'll have to see if there's other things that we can tweak along the way. And we didn't get much of a look, but we are able to see some of the class-specific abilities that you can unlock as you go through different skills and jobs. For example, the Paladin-style class Bardinger here gets the Aegis skill, which we've seen before. It usually activates on a % chance based on one of your stats or something similar, and then halves damage from a particular type of attack or that type of deal. A nice defensive option. However, we haven't actually had the opportunity to see the specifics of how these work. We didn't get like a concrete look at the skill menu being open and explaining what stats it uses and how often it triggers and all that fun stuff. So since we don't know the specifics, we'll wait for more details to come out, presumably in more preview material, and then do a complete breakdown of everything that we learn once we have that in our hands. Really, all told, I am massively impressed with this direct for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, and I'm really impressed with everything that they've built for us here as well. After the much greater mixed bag that was Fire Emblem Engage, despite its overall quite strong gameplay, it's really nice to see a bit of a return to form and an expansion of the world that Three Houses took place in. It seems like there's been a lot of refining of systems from that game that were good and interesting and innovative, but needed to be trimmed down or tweaked or refined more before they'd be considered truly strong, while also providing a lot of iteration on other classic staples of the Fire Emblem genre. Again, I love the concepts at play here with the way Divine Pulse is going to work with Divine Sand and other godly blessings, as well as how they're utilizing weapon durability with combat arts to still have that be an impactful system that doesn't get annoying for people who hate when their weapons break in the middle of combat just from attacking, right? The music seems phenomenal. The characters are super interesting. I'm fascinated by this direction that they're taking the story and how they're going to make that whole thing work. And just think about it. If we're getting all of this set up now, before the game has even come out, there is going to be a ton of hidden surprises and reveals and character moments that are really going to add a lot of spice to what is already a very spicy premise. Just the fact that we have guns as a next step for ranged gauntlets and how that's going to be tying back into those who slither in the dark and their freaking ICBMs that they had in Three Houses. We've seen little glimpses of these big, vast technological underground facilities. There's all sorts of stuff here that I can only imagine is going to get further elaborated on, to say nothing of the relationships with the gods and what Sothis is up to. There's so much to look forward to, and this new direct did nothing but build my hype and make me very excited to get my hands on the game mechanically as well. Of course, I would like to hear what your guys' thoughts are. Are you eager? Are you more hyped than you ever were? Are you for some reason disappointed? Is there something you saw that you didn't like? Have that discussion with me down in the comments below. I'm sure there'll be a lot that a lot of people want to say. And of course, If you want to see more Fire Emblem Fortunes Weave content, keep it tuned here. I'll be covering anything and everything I can get my hands on as we head up to the September release. With all that said, though, this has gone on long enough and I need to edit the whole damn thing down, so I'm going to end this one here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know if there's anything I missed in the comments. Most importantly, hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.